As I'm really good at analysis. So I noticed that there was a meter of indigo khadi from West Bengal costs exactly the same, 150 rupees, as a meter of indigo khadi from Jaipur. And that didn't make sense to me. I've got an MBA from a good school. I started off on the creative side, self-taught, doing what you guys do in the communications end rather than the designing end. But because in the U.S. everybody does everything, I also had to learn some graphic design skills. But where I'm going with that is, if you have a meter of khadi everywhere in the country and it's priced the same, 150 rupees per meter, that's a flat pricing curve. And a flat pricing curve is what certain types of coal have: oil and gas, gold, copper, commodities. And commodity pricing is the opposite of capturing a brand premium, which if you guys are designers, I imagine you are interested in doing. So that is what led me to start this crafts festival, because I did a piece of analysis that said there's an economic definition of functioning markets. One of the definitions is, are there any externalities? So externalities are things that are not paid for by the sector. And if you looked at what weaving families make, does it pay for education, healthcare, retirement? And the answer to that is, of course, none. So hand wovens have a ton of externalities. The whole craft sector has them. So on that measure, crafts are broken as a functioning market, because a functioning market would not have externalities. Another dimension of functioning markets is there free-flowing information? And the answer, of course, is no, because all the information stays up at the top. Nothing gets to the makers. So they don't know what market prices are. They don't know anything about demand. They don't know really anything about what happens to their products after it leaves their hands. So crafts fail on that dimension of functioning markets too. The other dimension is ease of market entry. So it's easy for the trader to enter and leave a market, but it's not easy for the maker, because these are generational skills. It takes at least 2 years, 3 years, maybe 4 generations to learn at the highest level. So crafts fail on that metric of functioning markets too. Another one is absence of monopolies. So I thought that was true, that there weren't monopolies, because actually the Indian craft sector is the economic term is fragmented of any market I can think of, because they're mostly single family makers. But I'm working on this project to document the supply chain of crafts here to meet some new EU laws. And for that, you have to trace products all the way back to the origin. And I've been looking for a top maker that also sourced their own cotton. But cotton comes from the Mumbai Collective. And that was a great solution to having a super fragmented market where one buyer can go, instead of having to go to 50 farms, he goes one place, he buys it, he's done. Especially for the big ones, that matters. But it corrupted almost immediately. To get the good stuff, you have to engage in paying someone. So I interviewed 2-3 makers in Kolkata, some of the top folks there, and they all said when they bought cotton, they bought a black box. All the information about it was rubbed off. The type of seed, when it was grown, where it was grown, anything about it, any identifying information was rubbed off. So they didn't know what they were getting. They just bought cotton. And then they had to rely on the hands and skills of their weavers to turn something that might not be great into something that was beautiful and luxurious and could command a top price. So does crafts fail on that dimension? Maybe, maybe not, but it's starting to look like yes, it does. So when you fail on 3 out of 5 dimensions, you've got trouble. When you fail on 4 dimensions, you have a market that's not functioning. On 5 out of 5 dimensions, you're definitely broken. So I came up with this strategy out of my MBA training. And it was a differentiation strategy. Like if you want to move from this pricing curve to that pricing curve, what do? You create some differentiation. You tell the market how you are different and unique and why your products are worth more. And I don't have to like what you have, but in Japan, there are hundreds of little hand-woven or handmade denim brands. And each customer has enough information to know that they want to be obsessive about that type of selvage denim, but not that type. India doesn't do that, but makers have done the hard work. You guys have done the hard work. To me, the function that's missing is telling the story in a way that is coherent to customers. So I want to talk about a lot of strategy because I feel like that is one of the solutions to what would fix the craft sector and the lives of a lot of people. The other thing I want to talk about is these big economic forces that are working right now. When I proposed this, the topic of this, I think Bode was like, but he went with it because he saw that these are big forces that are, they're just irresistible. Everything is starting to crash into technology, even hand weaving. I mean, I know you guys seen it in your own lives, and you guys are digital natives, so it's easier for you. But it also may mean that you don't see it, the big changes coming in the same way. And then the third kind of vector of what I wanted to talk about is the change in geopolitics. So because China has become as big as it is, how do you push back on China? You can't confront it directly. You can't confront it economically. You can't confront it militarily. What do? So there are answers and strategy, and we're going to talk about that. But the way I want to frame this is because everybody is terrified of what China may do to Taiwan. Like when Russia invaded Ukraine, 600 businesses had to pull out of Russia. They didn't want to, but their customers made them. Their customers said, we're not going to buy from you unless you say this is wrong. And so if China takes Taiwan, it won't matter so much to India, but Europe is screwed, the US is screwed. I'm not allowed to say bad words. I'm sorry. I'm going to adjust my speech. It's problems for both of those big markets, and Europe has reacted. So Europe is building a digital wall it's months away. It's March 30th of 2024 when all these new rules publish. Fashion, textiles, clothing are first on the list together with batteries. And India exports 36% of its handmaids to Europe. So what happens? How do you fix it? Is everybody with me? Any questions so far? I also wanted to say, I invited your professors to jump in and kind of co-create this with me. And this is probably like 2 years worth of content and 4 presentations. So I'm going to go really fast, but if there's something you want to know about, stop me and let's talk about it. Okay? The other things. So for Bode's biggest question in inviting me is that when I get into kind of the details of stuff, I'm super boring. So let's try to make that not happen too. Keep it lively, questions, all that. So today, we're at the intersection of profound social, technological, and environmental change. So the first industrial revolution, just to refresh your memory, was when agriculture started to mechanize. Now, India is still pre-industrial revolution in a couple of different ways. So first industrial revolution was when farming mechanized. And it was when, if you think about in India's development, it's when the cotton industry and weaving went from India back to England. And England started requiring, or the preferences were for the mechanized cloth. Second industrial revolution was technological, so that was the internet, that was being able to have a personal computer. Third industrial revolution was flattened silos and cross communication, so that would be social networks, Slack, when information is in a silo, only the person who built the silo can see it. But if you as a manager or the public want to be able to view it, you have to flatten those silos so that everybody can look into it. And that's what the third industrial revolution was about. And this one is about automation. So as if there weren't enough reasons to be afraid of artificial intelligence, one of them is called autonomous everything. So autonomous warehouses, if you've ordered anything from Amazon, it's Amazon delivered. You know that there are little robots that go and get that. So that's an autonomous warehouse. In California, where I live, in San Francisco, they've been testing autonomous driving for a long time, but now they have made it functional so that you can call a taxi. There's no taxi driver in it, and it's a Jaguar, which is a good Indian brand. So you think, so it's changed, but what does it mean? In the US, 10% of our gross domestic product is in transportation. So if 10% of you, if one of your parents lost their job in transportation, that's like grounds for social unrest. I read these management consulting reports, and a couple years ago, I was reading that at least in the US, AI would take between 9% and 47% of all US jobs. I'm like, why aren't we talking about this? And then I was like, how could this happen? But I'm sure all of you have used ChatGPT, and you start to see how it could happen now. And it's here. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you guys too is because, now I don't know this for a fact, but I am betting that somewhere there is a new company that is working on being able to make this true, which is, I want to build an Eileen Gray style house of 5,000 square feet on 2 floors on a 10,000 square foot lot. I want it to be linked to a family-friendly design that Jacques Grange would design the interiors for in that style. And I want to do it for $300,000, and I want you to optimize it for beauty. I promise that is coming. And then the other side of that would be, and specify, buy, and get all the materials delivered for it. So as new designers coming out, you're like, what the heck? What do I do? And so the first part of this presentation is kind of about that, of some strategies for how to deal with this big wall of stuff that's coming at you. So just back to the fourth industrial revolution for a second. So the World Economic Forum calls it a new chapter in human development, a fundamental change in the way we work, live, and relate to each other. But I also think that anytime there's big change, there's big fear, but also big opportunities. So the big 4 technology disruptions. We're going to talk about the building blocks of the big 4. So we're going to get into a little bit more detail about them and the kinds of things they can do, the kinds of things interconnected databases can do. And I talked to an AI professor and I said, what do I tell these students? That, do I tell them that technology is going to eat their job? And he said, no, actually, there will be more work for designers. Because AI is going to be so pervasive, I said AI uses data. Anywhere there's data and repetitive action, AI is going to eat that, but it has to optimize for something. And so who is going to be better at deciding what an algorithm should optimize for? The engineers who do the math, or you guys? Right? It's a different skill set. It's a different way of thinking about what it is that you've learned. But according to him, there are going to be zillions of new jobs and opportunities like that. And so the way he put it to me, he said, look to your left and look to your right, and you just have to be able to do it better than one of them. It's kind of the test. So I just wanted to start also with some warm-up questions to test where you guys are. Not test, but just so I'll know a little bit. But what do you guys talk about in regards to how technology may change your creative practice or careers? Will anybody just pipe up with that? Do you guys talk about it? Or are you too busy studying? Come on. Really? You guys don't talk about it? Is this the first time you're hearing what I'm saying? Is this the first time you've gotten this information? All right.
Yes, sometimes people think because as an interior designer, AI can usually, we can take a photo of that wall and AI can redesign it. So it's going to probably in the future take our jobs. But yes, we talk about it and we do know about it. What else needs to add there?
As a designer, you have to do a lot of research beforehand and after you have a concept. So AI somewhere eases up that process, the lengthy process which is going to take place.
That's a great point because it's going to help you do your job better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we optimize our time that way, but somewhere or the other AI is still lacking 2 to 3 years behind. So that's kind of a difficult part because we also have to figure out certain things because globalization is happening rapidly. That way it affects, but overall it helps us a lot.
So in the US, only 1 to 2% of all projects are custom. Like top 1 or 2% of all incomes are the only ones that can afford real design, build, multi-year architecture and design projects. So in my view, AI, and it's 10% that will use an interior designer or interior designer-like services or that level of product. So my thinking is that AI might expand the number of people who could get to it because everybody wants it, but the problem was price, right?
It won't necessarily take our jobs as we all feel, but it will help us if we learn to optimize it and wherever, whichever design phase it is required in. We need to know about a lot of AI tools because a lot of us are unaware of them. But there are a lot of tools which help us actually in different design processes.
Yeah.
Not only design.
This same professor's advice was always use the best tools you can afford, the most advanced tools, because that's what will keep you ahead.
So what as product designers we do is that we have certain ideas in our head. So we put them down in a paper, construct it into a prompt or something, and then we probably use Midjourney to see how AI would respond. Not to perceive the idea from AI, but to see how it is responding. So we would know how a machine is working and how we are supposed to make a design more user-centered.
So that's...
Because again, that's always a machine which is responding, but if we need to understand the user view, then...
So that's fast prototyping, fast visualization. Great use for it. Great use for it. Anybody else want to talk? Should we go to the next one? Yeah.
I see AI as Photoshop because before a few years when Photoshop was launched first, photographers were thinking that this has completely taken our job. But now we see that every photographer uses Photoshop. Without Photoshop, they won't deliver the content they are making. So AI is the same thing. So we can work together with AI. If we go against, it won't work. So AI won't take our job, that is for sure. But let's say a designer who knows how to work with it, will definitely take the job.
You are where this guy said the best place to be is, which is think of it as a tool that helps. And I'll also say that, all these innovations do change the eye, not just of viewers, but everybody who's going to buy something from you. So the expectations will change, and it's how to stay ahead. So there's a school. I was invited to be part of the review of the incoming syllabus. And so I started to ask around about what other schools did. And there's the best engineering school in California is called Caltech. And all of their students graduate now having done only net zero projects. By adding this one other constraint to their design education and their engineering education, they will walk into a world with some experience. And I'm just mentioning that because maybe next project you do, you want to start thinking that way of add another couple of constraints for how the world's going to be. Hey, do you guys agree that climate transition has to happen with electricity? Because that's where all the money, smarts, electric cars are going. And I don't know, it doesn't completely make sense to me, but is that the consensus here? That electrifying everything is the answer?
Because we are dependent on natural gases mainly compared to renewable energy sources, and if we see globally, then we have limited renewable energy sources, which people are planning on expanding further, but still the main consumption is natural gases, which is again harming the environment.
So you're describing an interim reality rather than an eventual solution. What about the eventual solution?
I don't think that electrifying everything would, affect climate change, because electricity would be, getting produced in a way which is not sustainable.
I challenge that, but keep going.
Okay. If we see that car batteries need to be replaced after a certain period of time, and after a certain period of time, that vehicle has to be replaced. So that way, again, the industry would rapidly keep on working, and which would affect the climate.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so same thing, the electricity is not the source which is renewable, right? So
It's not true. It's just not true.
But we need to exploit other resources to do that, right? It's not something which will regenerate from the raw product, byproduct it is used.
So you're talking about the current limits of national development rather than an eventual solution.
Yeah. And,
Okay, I get that.
yeah. And when the electricity is transformed from a place to place, it is reduced by 50%. So there's power which is burnt in the transfer.
Sure.
Yeah, so that won't give a full efficiency when we use it. The products will give the products are very efficient in use for now, let's say.
Mhm.
But the electricity itself is not 100% efficient. So it is like making our jobs much more complex.
Okay. The rest of the world has landed on the solution that electrifying everything is the answer, and you need to build the infrastructure back from that. So I imagine you guys have talked about ESG departments, CSR departments, kind of the roles of those. Yes? So what do you think the reasons why public companies have those departments are? I'll just tell you what it is in the US. Their shareholders hate it. Their shareholders want to save the money. They don't want to do this. They only do it because their customers demand it. And so this new world that we're walking into, these new capabilities, might be able to use the money that goes to that for something that is actually helpful rather than performatively helpful. There's an idea that we have that I think might be helpful. It's called a perpetuity, and it's a way to price anything. So if you're trying to figure out when you're being presented with information whether you think it's true or not, perpetuity says take whatever the free cash flow is or the expense of that and divide it by the interest rate. And that's the value of it. So of an ESG CSR department, whatever the cost of that is, divided by the interest rate, which comes into millions and billions really fast, That's the amount that companies want to save. So all the things that you guys probably care about, in the US where I come from, young people are having anxiety dreams about climate change in the same way that my generation had anxiety dreams about nuclear war, of this is the end. They look to my generation and go, what were you thinking? And so ESG departments are valid and valuable, and they do good things. But I promise you, the only reason they exist, at least with international companies that that have shares sold on public exchanges, is because their customers demand it. Their customers, if you guys didn't push for it, wouldn't be there. So let's talk about circularity just for a second. When you guys learned it, was it at the kind of the making level, the industrial level, the company level, the country level? What level do you guys talk about it at? Come on. Do you guys not talk about it? You don't talk about circularity? All right, I'll just jump in. So, craft models, makers, are almost perfect little models of circularity. I did a tranche of research on some natural dye bandanas I had made. And what it looked like, at least, now this is one data point. It's not valid at a data analysis level, but there were 13 different families that all had individual expertise, and they were part of this connected group of people who made a product. So each one of them had very deep knowledge, and they didn't try to take each other's jobs. They just cooperated, and everything really was circular. So the traditional use for Dabu, the traditional way to get to it up in Bagru in Rajasthan is with rice hulls. But this one community where I had stuff made from, they didn't have rice, but they did have a wood mill. So they used sawdust instead. And that creative adaptation was was the way it seems to work at the making level. But if any of you guys have an Apple computer, the last time you traded it in, you got an amount free off the next purchase. So what Apple does, instead of completely tearing them up, getting the ingredients out of them, although they do that, they just try to extend the life of the product and open new markets where there wouldn't be customers for the highest end product. Say, for example, India, where it's a lower cost environment. There aren't very many people who would want to pay for the top of the line of the US prices, but they do want the product, they do want the creativity, they do want the access to those programs. So that's how companies handle circularity. I read an HBR case about a tractor company. So the tractor company, their first model was, I sell it to you and you come back to me for service and it's your problem. And because of circularity, the only way they could justify it was to create new markets. So it was the same thing. I no longer sell you this tractor, I lease you this tractor so that when the lease is out, I will have maintained it, I know if it's in good shape, and I can take that back and sell it in a new market and develop that market. And then try to take it back and get the ingredients out of it. But that's the corporate way of doing circularity. It doesn't look like circularity in the way you guys may recognize it, but it's, I come from a country where everything's about money. Everything's about net present value. If we can't put a dollar value on it, then we're suspicious. And you guys live in a culture that is just different. You value other things. You value family, you value faith, like you put value there. So I know I'm making a contrast, but I hope it's a helpful one. So let's talk about strategy for a second. You guys probably use the word pretty frequently. I have a design strategy. But the point I'm hoping to make is that there's a distinction between the word and the way it's commonly used and what it means in a formal business strategy sense. So we'll have a couple of examples here that I hope will illuminate that. But it's this thing that you do in an ongoing basis, and that is your strategy. And then everything underneath that is a tactic. But if you are working for a big company and they're smart, they will have a corporate strategy, they'll have a product level strategy, but everything will relate back to that corporate level of strategy. So there are three levels of it. The corporate's defines the scope of it. The industries it competes in includes decisions about diversification, vertical integration. The business strategy is concerned with how the firm competes, and the functional strategy is the detailed deployment. So that would be this string of tactics and then actions that you would do out of that to build this big overall strategy. The other thing I wanted to talk about was this once in 100-year alignment that I think we talked about a little bit. So the recent geopolitical events align democracies with democracies. Like there won't be another big U.S. company investment in a country that is not a democracy. And how many other democracies are there at China's scale? It's like there's only one, it's you guys. So if autocracies only have autocracies as clients, and India is somewhere in the middle of that because you guys do trade with Russian gas and Iraq and Iran and other places that we are challenged by. It still matters because as the world's biggest democracy, like I think this is a golden time for India to make its claim for that part of that business. China has an aging population. You guys have one of the youngest. Like all the demography is in your favor. And one of the cases that I want to make is that I hope you'll take advantage of that. So I wanted to just engage your imaginations for a second of what if a bunch of bad things happened outside of Gujarat? Like what would you do? What would you do if I'm sorry, So what would you do if, I spoke to the wrong slide. So cluster theory is a formal branch of strategy pioneered by this guy named Michael Porter. And it was, like the example was Hollywood. If you want to make a Hollywood movie, if you want to make the Avatar 2, where do you go? India makes great movies. China makes great movies, but if you want a Hollywood movie that's a blockbuster that leads, that's going to be international, there's really only one place to make it, with a couple of exceptions. So why is that? Cluster theory says that the numbers of connections between all the elements that build a capability, that is a signifier of a successful cluster. You may have heard craft clusters, totally different level of ambition, but I do think it comes from this same research. It's just a different application of the word. So cluster theory is, what if you could design a map of the institutions it would take for your school or this town or India to become a center of knowing how to design for the fourth industrial revolution. And we'll get into what some of those different skills are. But I just wanted to pitch this out as an idea. This was a map I did for a medical tourism cluster. I had a client who wanted to build a new hospital on the border of the US and Mexico. And so we defined all these institutions. So you map who it is that you want to be part of this. You define what the institutions of learning are, the government institutions you'll have to engage, the places of collaboration, some of the other things that would drive it that would be associated, the tourism, and then kind of other associations. And then you would start to map what those connections are. So what we found by doing this work was that this guy should not build this hospital because there weren't nurses who were trained on the new equipment for the latest in cancer curing. And we didn't think that there would be the cooperation of the educational institutions to build those capabilities. And it was 4 years away, and the funder may not have wanted to stay on the line funding it for that amount of time. So it's useful to make projects go forward. It's useful to make them go backwards. But what if you guys were to map what were necessary for example, there's there's something called value flows, which is accounting for distributed technology networks. And it's different than double entry accounting. So double entry bookkeeping is how your bank works, but value flows is how your Cash App works. So it's numbingly hard to gather, but it's also going to be how UIs change. Like, you've had all this training in UI and UX, but it probably was based on flat technology rather than the distributed internet and one-at-a-time transactions that don't have to balance immediately. So that would be one of the skills that you would put up here where you guys could develop expertise that I promise you, nobody in the world thinks like this right now. But you can bet China is doing it, just exactly this kind of thing. Where are we going to put the cluster for managing the fourth industrial revolution? You can bet Japan is doing it. You can bet Korea is doing it. It seems like it would be a good idea for India to do it too. Are you guys with me? Do you need to stand up and stretch for a second? Because I know this is a lot. Everybody with me? Okay. So in order to compete with AI, what do? These are some terms of marketing and strategy. So comparative advantage is I do something well. I draw well. I write well. I know Illustrator better than anybody else. I am able to think in perfect proportion. Like, those are skills that you have. So how do you turn that into a competitive advantage? The competitive advantage starts to be something that you could build a business on, that you could build a product on. But the eventual goal is something called sustainable competitive advantage. And that's when you can put legal protections behind it, when you have brand, when you have a big following like on social, things that can be counted on. And then you can go to your bank or the market and they will, in some form, apply that idea of perpetuity and say, your idea is worth this much money. I will pay you this amount. I will give you this much to build your business. So, holding together for you where I'm going? So, you architecture students will know this. So I've got Zaha Hadid here as an example of comparative advantage. And that's because she started making drawings way before anybody trusted her with doing a building. So she was just one of these public intellectuals who became enamored with early Russian constructivist art, which was the first truly abstract art. And she saw it as an expression of energy and angles, and she's described it all in a way that you could love. So buildings that look like that were not loved at the time. They're maybe not even loved now, but it created this persona around her. It was kind of a brand halo where she was recognized as a thinker who was moving the profession ahead, and that she was a woman and Iraqi. It was the German furniture company to let her build a firehouse. And I'll think of their name in a minute. Vitra. So Vitra let her build her first building. And then as the building started to be successful, she built all over the world. She's gone now. I think her personal projects are just starting to finish up. But that's an example of comparative advantage. So I've got this as competitive advantage. Does anybody here know this painter? So it's Yves Klein, and he was part of one of the founders of conceptual art. So like this work was, he took women's bodies in performance. And when you've got a performance or a happening, it is understood that the beauty of the art is in the moment, but understanding you still have to pay rent, you still need a product to sell. So it's ephemera or something that happened during the performance that is what got sold. So this is women's bodies dipped in his paint. And he started to think that he was being copied. So French perv, right? I open with this. What do you do when you're being copied? What do you do to protect this look that you have established? And his answer was to develop something called Yves Klein International Blue. So the color of the blue up there was this color of paint that he patented. Now it was kind of fluorescent, but then all of a sudden nobody else could use it except him, unless he licensed it. So it was a way for him to keep track of who his admirers, competitors, copyists were. So this was a legal protection. And that's what the difference between comparative advantage and competitive advantage is something that you can rely on that starts to build up a wall or dig a moat around what it is you do. So I've got Frank Gehry as an example of sustainable competitive advantage, because architecture students, you guys know the story of his program? Any architecture students in here? All right. I'm sorry. Interiors, okay. So he repurposed an airline design program to make his buildings. This is the Disney Center in Los Angeles, and it's covered in titanium. So to make a building that looks like this, how would you do it? So he took airline software and he started to modify it so that over time, any building that looks like the last two we've looked at run off of this. That's kind of the definition of sustainable competitive advantage, where at any moment you can cut everybody else off from it. You've got legal protections, you've got patents, you've got trademarks, you've got brand. I'll also mention that in his case, he had this reputation that he established early on with a very different kind of house. And it had a chain link fence, and it had just some tin on the side. And this is in a very fancy neighborhood at the beach in Los Angeles, Venice Beach. And in interviews, they asked him why he wanted to build something like this. And he said, I wanted to develop an architecture that didn't lie to my children. So he was trying to reflect contemporary life in the built environment. And that was what established the reputation that let him go on to do things like this. I will say, I know the interior designer who's working on his last residence. So he's still around, like he's in his 90s, but he's still working. And he is using one of the most traditional interior designers in the country to do the interior of an exterior that looks like this. So if you have growth and you have market share, when growth is high and you have high market share, that's really a star. When you have high market share and low growth, that's when you're doing it because you can make money on it. So if you're thinking about a furniture product, then that's where you would want to be with it. Up here is where you're going to get press attention for the innovation. You'll probably get the early adapters. But down here, when growth is lower, that's when you start to actually really make money on it. It doesn't matter so much for residential interiors, but think about an office chair. How much you have to invest in the tooling, the design, the testing the number of rubs per inch. To get a government contract in the US, Steelcase had to say, basically, this chair will last forever. Or they didn't get the contract because that's the way the rules were written. So I'm back to the comparative advantage and competitive advantage slide. So comparative advantage is when you do something that is better than your rivals. Competitive advantage is when you do some things that are better on an ongoing basis. So better quality, higher margins, you have a lower cost environment, your capabilities are more durable, you have a lower cost structure, you've got branding, you've got these things that are durable that you have built over time. And then sustainable competitive advantage is when you put patents, trademarks, legal protections, and brand behind it, and maybe they're part of your market share or trust. And social can definitely be one of those barriers too. So what I'm hoping, am I making the point about being aware of big forces? Is that coming through? We're going to do a little test in a minute. Might want to pay attention. So find the thing that makes you valuable and different. Build defensible moats and walls around it. And the point I was making here is anytime you do a new project, new research, you always have to look at the environment. Did you guys do any, when you did an analysis for a new project, did you have a name for it? 3, 4 initials, like how you approached it? Or was it really just design research? Okay. So.
But we look into different aspects of designing. It's just not solely based on design. You also have to understand the history and the aspects which are relating to that product. If we are
Okay. So what I wanted to capture out of this is that it might be good to draw back your lens to get to environmental scanning, some strategy formation for not what you want that project to be, but what you want your brand to be. Because if you're competing against AI, it's becoming visible will be one of your biggest defenses. So this is a quick example of it. Walmart is it used to be the biggest company in the world. I think Apple is now. You may not know it, but I'm just going to tell a quick story. So their strategy was lower prices every day, and it was how they treated their vendors. It was how their executives in big U.S. companies travel business class or first class. If you worked for Walmart, you were in economy every single time. When you went to a business lunch, there was, it wasn't, 4 martinis. It was a turkey sandwich and a Coke, on a picnic bench. Everything was lower prices. The advantage of having something simple that's your corporate strategy is also, if you have, I think at some point Walmart had over 1 million people working for it. If it's really simple, you can also convey that to your employees. Think how valuable that would be in your design practice. If you had 40 people working with you or for you, if everybody knew what the mission was and could say it in one sentence, it would matter because it starts to govern those hundreds or thousands of decisions that go into every project. So I went to the Volvo plant when I was in grad school. I bought a car, and they were in the middle of the second phase of a 9-year strategy. And if you're a big car company and you have dealers all over the world and you're a $800 million business, you can't turn on a dime, especially because you have to engineer things, you have to make things. So in order to try to, they started off as this really reliable, interesting car that focused on safety. So if you were a mom in 1960s America, you wanted this car because you knew, like, it was in a steel cage. Your kids would always be safe. They were the first ones to put in seat belts. Like, that was just the car known for safety. But the competitive environment had gotten so intense that they knew they needed to do more. So this 9-year strategy was reinforce what you do well first. And you could say the same thing about when you start to do something new in your design practice. Reinforce what you're known for first. And then if you look at these two, design or engineering, which one's easier? Design, because engineering takes longer. It's math, it's testing, especially if it's innovation. You've got people's lives in your hands. You have responsibilities to your shareholders, your insurers, the people who buy things from you, that you're not going to have a car that blows up. So the second 3 years was for design, and that's when I went to the factory. All the cool young people who were building the cars, union members, but they were probably 28 to maybe 45. They all knew this 9-year strategy and where they were in it. And like, oh yeah, we reconfigured the whole manufacturing floor so that we could execute on this. And they're not exclusive. It's design on top of safety. So they'd already reinforced and accomplished more higher end safety features than anybody else. Then they were going to make the car comfortable, because that was the part everybody made fun of, is they were kind of ugly and they weren't as comfortable as a lot of people wanted. I bought that car. I valued it for that. I liked the practicality. But then later on they went to engineering, and now, they are in the same category as an Audi, which was only known for engineering before. But that's the power of strategy. If you think about it and then you execute on it, it can really matter. So Amazon is the most complex example. It uses, if you had to think, could anybody ever supplant Amazon? And I know Reliance is a contender, but internationally the answer is no, because in 30 years that they've been a public company, they have never paid a dividend. They take all the money and they reinvest it in doing something new, so that you make money on the share price, you don't make it on the dividends. And they just keep going industry by industry. I think Jeff Bezos said, anybody else's profit margin is my lunch. So it's just a super complex strategy they call the flywheel. And it's this, which is everything they do reinforces another part of the business. They hated paying Google, so they developed Amazon Web Systems because they have siloed information that's more secure than the public internet. They built Amazon Alexa voice systems because they have data centers. They could do streaming, which built Amazon Studios. Because they have Alexa, they can move into healthcare that begins at home. You're starting to see the picture that is their strategy that they call the flywheel. I gotta say, I thought there were going to be other kinds of audiences in here rather than just interior design, and I feel like I'm getting pretty far away from that. Let me see if there is. I do. Yeah, let's do this one. So there's a type of analysis. If you're thinking about a product or a big, complex project like the new Parliament buildings, what is it you would want to think about? And in the case of a building, increasingly it's security, right? So if you are, you would want to do the analysis to see where you are vulnerable and build defenses against it. You would want to look into the future to say, if we build something now, what could it be vulnerable to in the future? And then you start to build to counterpoint that. And this is what it looks like. So if you're in the middle, you want to look at all the threats on each one of these dimensions. So the potential for new entrants would be new competitors. And because it's a government, that's not a possibility. But if you think about it, it would be like a new type of building technique, a new type of security system. If that innovation doesn't go fast enough, you risk the part in the center. If you're building it, you think the power of your suppliers. Because I'm the national government, is my buyer power stronger than their seller power? So everybody's got to watch a budget. This would be a way to track that. Bargaining power of customers, that would be the people who vote for it. In other words, what level of splendor do we create that doesn't cause a backlash?